Echoes of the unexamined. The sun beat down on Red Rock, baking the dust-choked streets. Caleb, a man etched with the harsh lines of the frontier and haunted by shadows of his past, leaned against the dusty window of the saloon, a half-empty glass of whiskey warming his hand. He wasn't looking for trouble, just a quiet drink. But trouble, like the desert wind, had a way of finding him. He overheard Silas Graves, the town's landowner, a man whose smile never reached his cold eyes, talking in hushed tones with two hired guns. The claim jumpers won't know what hit them. By week's end, that land, and everything on it, will be ours. The words, laced with menace, sent a chill down Caleb's spine. He knew Graves. Greed was a sickness that festered in men like him, and it always left a trail of blood. Caleb had walked away from the law, from the violence, years ago. He'd seen too much, done too much. The echoes of his past mistakes. They were outnumbered, outgunned, but they had something Graves didn't, the burning conviction of right on their side. The chase was on. Graves's men ambushed them in a narrow canyon, the air thick with the smell of gunpowder and the roar of gunfire. Caleb, his hand steady on his Colt, felt a grim familiarity return. He hadn't been this close to death in years. He fought like a man possessed, driven by the need to protect those around him and finally confront the ghosts of his past. Jebediah fell, a bullet finding its mark, and Iona cried out in anguish. Caleb felt a surge of rage, a primal scream echoing in his soul. The climax arrived in a dusty, sun-baked showdown in the heart of Red Rock. Caleb faced Graves, the two men mirroring each other in the harsh light. It wasn't just about land or money anymore. It was about redemption, about facing the unexamined life, about choosing justice over apathy. The tension crackled in the air, thick and suffocating. One shot rang out, shattering the silence. Who fell? Did Caleb finally find redemption, or did the echoes of his past drag him down? The answers lie buried in the dust of Red Rock, waiting to be unearthed. The shot echoed through the dusty street, the sound swallowed by the vast emptiness that surrounded Red Rock. Time seemed to hang suspended, the only movement the swirling dust devils dancing in the sudden silence. Caleb stood, his Colt still smoking, the hammer clicking softly as the cylinder spun. Silas Graves lay sprawled in the dirt, a crimson stain blooming on his chest. His cold eyes, moments before filled with avarice and malice, now stared blankly at the cloudless sky. The townsfolk, who had huddled in doorways and behind windows, cautiously emerged. Sarah rushed to Caleb's side, her face a mixture of relief and lingering fear. Iona knelt beside Jebediah, her shoulders shaking with silent grief. Doc Holliday, ever the pragmatist, checked Graves's pulse, then nodded grimly. Dead, he confirmed. The immediate threat was gone, but the echoes of violence still lingered in the air. Caleb knew that killing Graves hadn't erased his past, hadn't absolved him of his sins. It had simply been a necessary act, a desperate attempt to protect the innocent. He looked at Sarah, her eyes searching his. He saw not judgment, but understanding. "It's over," he said, his voice rough. For now. The following days were a whirlwind of activity. Graves's ill-gotten gains were redistributed among the townspeople, giving Jebediah's family some measure of solace and allowing Iona's people to reclaim their ancestral land. With a gentle nudge of his heels, he urged his horse forward. He rode out into the vast, open landscape, the setting sun painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. The echoes of the unexamined life were still there, but they were fainter now, almost whispers. Caleb rode towards the horizon, towards an uncertain future, carrying with him the weight of his past and the fragile hope of redemption. The West was vast, and his journey was far from over. The vastness of the West swallowed Caleb whole. Days bled into weeks, weeks into months. He drifted from one dusty town to another, a silent observer of human struggles and fleeting triumphs. He wasn't looking for trouble, but trouble, like a persistent shadow, often found him. He'd help where he could, mediating disputes, offering a steady hand in a bar fight, occasionally drawing his gun to protect the innocent, then move on, leaving no trace but the whisper of his name. One day, he rode into a small, forgotten settlement called Dust Devil Springs. It was a parched, desolate place, clinging to life like a tenacious weed in the cracked earth. The townsfolk were wary, their eyes hollow and their spirits broken. He learned that a ruthless railroad baron, a man named Jasper Thorne, was trying to force them off their land, aiming to lay track through the heart of the valley. Thorne's methods were persuasive. Intimidation, arson, even outright murder, nothing was off the table. Caleb felt a familiar stirring within him. It wasn't the thrill of violence, but the cold, hard knot of responsibility. He'd seen this before, this raw, unchecked greed that trampled everything in its path. He couldn't walk away. He found the town's de facto leader, an aging rancher named Elias, a man whose spirit was almost broken, but not quite. Thorne's got us cornered, Elias rasped, his voice rough from years of hardship. We're no match for his men. You're not alone, Caleb said, his voice quiet but firm. He spent the next few days observing, learning. Thorne's operation was well organized, his men hardened and ruthless. Caleb knew a direct confrontation would be suicide. He needed a different approach. He sought out the town's blacksmith, a wiry woman named Martha, whose calloused hands could forge steel and mend broken hearts. He needed her help. He explained his plan, a risky gamble that hinged on surprise and a little bit of luck. Martha, seeing the determination in Caleb's eyes, agreed. Under the cover of darkness, they worked together. Martha crafted special horseshoes, designed to spark against the rocks, creating showers of sparks. Caleb, meanwhile, gathered what little explosives the town possessed, blasting powder used for mining. He planned to use the sparks and the explosives to create a diversion, drawing Thorne's men away from the town. The next day, as Thorne's men rode into Dust Devil Springs, their faces grim and their intentions clear, Caleb and Martha put their plan into action. Caleb, hidden amongst the rocks overlooking the town, struck two rocks together, sending a shower of sparks cascading down the hillside. Simultaneously, Martha, positioned on the opposite side of the valley, detonated small charges of blasting powder, creating a series of loud explosions that echoed through the canyons. The effect was immediate. Thorne's men, startled by the sudden chaos, panicked. They scattered, their horses rearing and whinnying in fear. Caleb, using the confusion to his advantage, picked off the outriders, his shots ringing out with deadly accuracy. The townsfolk, seeing their chance, rallied. Armed with whatever they could find, pitchforks, axes, even rocks, they charged at Thorne's disorganized men. The battle was short and brutal. Thorne's men, caught off guard and outmaneuvered, were quickly overwhelmed. Thorne himself arrived late, his face contorted with rage. He saw his men scattered, his plans in ruins. He drew his gun, his eyes fixed on Caleb. "You," he snarled. "You ruined everything." Caleb faced him, his expression calm, but his eyes hard. "This land belongs to these people," he said. "Not to you." The two men stood facing each other, the silence broken only by the wind whistling through the desolate valley. Thorne fired, but Caleb was faster. His shot found its mark, and Thorne crumpled to the ground. Dust Devil Springs was saved. The townsfolk, their faces etched with exhaustion but also with hope, gathered around Caleb. They had fought for their land, and they had won. Caleb knew his work was done here. He had faced another demon, another echo of the unexamined life, and emerged victorious. He mounted his horse, the setting sun casting long shadows across the valley. He looked back at Dust Devil Springs, a small beacon of hope in the vast wilderness. Then, he turned his horse and rode towards the horizon, towards the next town, the next challenge, the next echo waiting to be confronted. His journey was far from over. The years that followed blurred into a tapestry of dusty trails, fleeting alliances, and the constant, gnawing reminder of his past. Caleb became a legend whispered in saloons and around campfires, the drifter who appeared when hope was lost, a phantom of justice in a land often devoid of it. He never stayed long, always moving on, driven by an internal restlessness he couldn't quite explain. He'd faced down corrupt sheriffs, rescued kidnapped settlers, and even helped a group of Native Americans reclaim their sacred burial grounds. Each act of justice was a small penance, a way of atoning for the choices he'd made, the life he'd left behind. One harsh winter, he found himself in a remote mountain town called Havenwood. It was a place clinging to the side of a snow-covered peak, its inhabitants as rugged and unforgiving as the landscape itself. He learned that a mining company, led by a ruthless man named Cale, was exploiting the town's resources and its people. Cale's greed was insatiable, his methods brutal. He controlled the town, the mine, and even the local law enforcement. Caleb felt the familiar tug of responsibility. He was older now, the lines on his face deeper, his movement slower, but the fire in his eyes still burned. He sought out the town's resistance, a small group of miners led by a fiery woman named Ilara. They were desperate, outgunned, but determined to fight for their home. Caleb joined them, his experience and reputation giving them a much-needed boost of confidence. He helped them plan, strategize, and train. He taught them how to use the terrain to their advantage, how to fight dirty, how to survive. He became their unlikely leader, a grizzled veteran guiding a band of underdogs against a powerful foe. The conflict came to a head during a blizzard. Cale, confident in his power, had underestimated the resilience of the townspeople and the cunning of their unexpected ally. Caleb and the miners launched a surprise attack, using the blizzard as cover. They targeted the mining company's operations, disrupting their supply lines and freeing the workers who had been forced into near slavery. The final confrontation took place at the mine itself. Caleb faced Cale, the two men silhouetted against the swirling snow. Cale, consumed by rage, lunged at Caleb, but the old lawman was ready. He moved with a surprising agility, disarming Cale and knocking him to the ground. As he stood over Cale, his gun drawn, Caleb felt a familiar weariness wash over him. He had faced countless men like Cale, men driven by greed and a thirst for power. He had killed them all. But this time, something was different. He looked at Cale, his face twisted with fear and defeat, and he saw not just an enemy, but a broken man. Caleb holstered his gun. He had come to Havenwood to stop Cale, but he realized that killing him wouldn't solve anything. It wouldn't bring back the lives that had been lost, it wouldn't heal the wounds that had been inflicted. Justice wasn't about vengeance. It was about rebuilding, about giving people a chance to heal and start over. "Get out of Havenwood," Caleb said, his voice low and hard. "And never come back." Cale, his pride shattered, his power stripped away, nodded meekly and stumbled away. The blizzard subsided, and the sun peeked through the clouds, casting a golden light over Havenwood. The townspeople emerged from their homes, their faces filled with relief and gratitude. They had won. Caleb watched them, a quiet satisfaction in his eyes. He had faced the last echo of his unexamined life, the final ghost of his past. He had found a measure of peace, not in violence, but in the quiet act of choosing mercy over vengeance. He knew his journey was finally over. He had come full circle. He had seen the darkness in men's hearts, but he had also witnessed the resilience of the human spirit, the enduring power of hope. He had found redemption not in running from his past, but in confronting it, in choosing justice, and ultimately, in choosing mercy. He mounted his horse for the last time. He didn't know where he was going, but he knew he was finally at peace. The echoes of the unexamined life were silent now, replaced by the quiet whisper of a life well lived, a life dedicated to justice, a life finally his own. He rode off into the setting sun, a lone figure against the vast, open landscape, leaving behind him not a legend of violence, but a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit. His journey was complete. Join the adventure with the Western Echoes, Cowboy Tales Unleashed. If you're loving our cowboy stories and captivating tales, don't miss out. Hit that subscribe button to stay updated on all our future posts. Saddle up and ride along with us.